Why did a man who once seemed immortal look so fragile? How could a voice that shook the world come from a body so clearly in pain? And what was he trying to tell us in the 6 minutes it took to sing one final, desperate song for the cameras? Number 15, why this specific song? Elvis Presley did not write Unchained Melody. He was prescribed over 10,000 doses of drugs in the first 8 months of 1977 alone. The song he chose to pour his final televised energy into was originally written for a little-known 1955 prison film called Unchained. The song wasn't one of his signature hits. It wasn't Hound Dog or Jailhouse Rock. It wasn't a song that defined his rebellious youth or his superstar peak. By 1977, Unchained Melody was a standard, a piece of music covered by hundreds of artists. But Elvis didn't perform it like a standard. He performed it like a confession. The lyrics speak of a deep, painful longing. Oh, my love, my darling, I've hungered for your touch. For a man who was profoundly lonely, surrounded by people yet fundamentally isolated, these words were not just lyrics. They were his reality. He was separated from his ex-wife Priscilla. He was separated from his daughter Lisa Marie for long stretches. More deeply, he was separated from the healthy, vibrant man he used to be. The song is about waiting for a love to return. Elvis seemed to be waiting for something else, maybe for relief, maybe for peace, maybe for time itself to turn back. The choice of the song was not random. In his final tour, he had a set list, but he often veered off it, choosing songs that matched his mood. He was drawn to gospel songs and powerful ballads in his later years, songs that required immense vocal power and emotional depth. Unchained Melody was a perfect vehicle for this. It allowed him to showcase the one part of him that hadn't failed yet, his voice. And he could sit at the piano, a position of vulnerability, and let his voice do the work his body no longer could. The context of the song's origin, a film about a prisoner yearning for freedom, adds another layer. Elvis himself was a prisoner. He was a prisoner of his fame, trapped in a gilded cage of hotel rooms and concert halls. He was a prisoner of his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who kept him on a relentless touring schedule. He was a prisoner of his own body and his addictions. When he sang, "I need your love, God speed your love to me," it was a prayer from a man trapped on all sides. He was reaching for something he knew he couldn't have. He wasn't just performing a song, he was living it out for one last time in front of the world. Number 14, what was happening just before he walked on stage. The concert in Rapid City, South Dakota, on June 21st, 1977, was just another stop on a grueling tour. Elvis had performed the night before in Lincoln, Nebraska. He would perform the next night in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. His personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, known as Dr. Nick, was traveling with him, his medical bag filled with an arsenal of prescription drugs. The hours before our show were a ritual. They were a carefully managed process of getting Elvis from a state of lethargy and pain to a point where he could function on stage for 2 hours. He suffered from chronic pain, insomnia, and a host of other ailments. He relied on a cocktail of drugs to sleep, to wake up, and to manage his pain. Waking Elvis up was often a difficult task. His aides would sometimes have to use cold water on a cloth to bring him around. He would be groggy, his speech slurred. He needed uppers to get him going, painkillers to manage his body's complaints, and other medications for his various health issues, including glaucoma and high blood pressure. On the day of the Rapid City show, there was no reason to believe it was different. He was likely given a packet of pills by one of his aides, a pre-show cocktail designed to provide energy and block pain. But these drugs came at a cost. They contributed to his bloating and fluid retention. They slurred his speech, which is evident in some of the show's spoken word moments. And they created a disconnect between his mind and body. The man who walked out on that stage was not a healthy man being propped up. He was a profoundly sick man, medicated to the point of being able to perform a physical feat his body was screaming against. His entourage, the Memphis Mafia, insulated him. They created a bubble where his reality was the only reality. They took care of his every need, from fetching him food to administering his medications. This environment meant he was never forced to confront the severity of his condition. The show must go on. That was the mantra. The Colonel needed the money. The band and crew needed the work. And Elvis, perhaps, needed the adoration of the crowd more than anything. It was the one place he still felt like a king. So, before he walked out to sing Unchained Melody, he was not resting or preparing in a healthy way. He was being medically managed. He was being pushed through another night, another town, another performance. The man at the piano was the end result of a long, sad, and private process that happened just out of sight of the cameras. Number 13, Who, was the man holding the microphone. The man holding the microphone for Elvis was Charlie Hodge. Hodge was only 5 feet 3 inches. He had been with Elvis since they met in the Army in 1958. His presence during this performance is one of its most heartbreaking elements. Charlie Hodge was more than a background singer or a stagehand. He was a constant in Elvis's life for nearly 2 decades. He lived at Graceland. He was a core member of the Memphis Mafia. His role on stage evolved over the years. He sang harmony, played guitar, and handed Elvis his signature scarves to throw to the audience. But by 1977, his role had become much more intimate and concerning. He was Elvis's human mic stand. Elvis was at the piano, but he was too weak, and his breathing was too labored to hold the microphone himself. The effort of singing, of pushing air from his damaged lungs, of reaching for the powerful notes, required all his concentration. He couldn't spare the energy to hold a microphone, so Charlie knelt beside him, just out of the main camera shot, his hand steadily holding the mic to Elvis's mouth. This single image speaks volumes. Elvis, the man who had once commanded the stage with explosive energy, now needed physical assistance to perform a ballad. The microphone, once an extension of his power, was now something he couldn't even hold. Charlie Hodge's face, when you see it in wider shots, is a mask of concentration and concern. He knew how sick Elvis was. He saw it every day. He was part of the system that kept Elvis going, but he was also a friend watching another friend fade away. There is a tenderness in the way he holds the mic, a careful attention to make sure Elvis's voice is captured perfectly. It is a gesture of service, but also a gesture of profound sadness. He is literally supporting Elvis's voice, the last part of the king, that still worked perfectly. While Elvis's body was failing, Charlie was there to ensure the song could get out. This relationship was complex. Hodge was an employee, but also a friend. He was fiercely loyal to Elvis. Some have criticized him and others in the inner circle for not doing more to stop Elvis's self-destruction. But the reality was more complicated. Elvis was the boss. He was a force of nature, even in his decline. Defying him was not simple. So Charlie did his job. He sang harmony, he handed out scarves, and in June 1977, he knelt down and held a microphone for his friend, enabling one of the most devastating and beautiful final statements in music history. Number 12, can you hear the struggle in his breath? Elvis's lungs were operating at about 30% of their normal capacity. He suffered from emphysema despite not being a heavy smoker. His breathing during the performance is a raw, audible record of his physical decay. Listen closely to the recording. In between the powerful, soaring vocal lines, you can hear it. A quick, sharp gasp for air. A labored intake of breath that sounds almost painful. His phrasing is different from earlier recordings. He has to break up lines of the song to find a place to breathe. He is not just singing the song, he is fighting for the air to sing it. This is not artistic choice. This is physical necessity. His body, weighed down by extra pounds and ravaged by prescription drug abuse, was struggling to perform the basic function of breathing, let alone the athletic act of singing a power ballad. His enlarged heart and other internal problems put pressure on his lungs. The effort is visible on his face. His eyes are closed in concentration, not just for emotional effect, but because he is focusing every ounce of his being on controlling his breath. He needs to push enough air through his vocal cords to create that legendary sound, but his body is failing to provide the fuel. The performance becomes a duel between his willpower and his physical limitations. The voice wants to soar. The lungs can barely keep up. The tension is palpable. When he sings, lonely rivers flow to the sea, He has to take a noticeable breath before the second to the sea. In his prime, that would have been a single effortless phrase. Now, it's a hurdle. The beauty of the performance is that he overcomes it. He knows his limits. He works within them, using his incredible vocal technique to mask the struggle. But it's there. It's the ghost in the machine. It's the sound of a man running out of time, running out of air. The final high note is a testament to this struggle. It's a cry of defiance. He gathers all the air his failing body can give him and unleashes it in a sound of pure, raw emotion. The note is not just musical, it is biological. It is the sound of a man giving everything he has left, knowing there isn't much more to give. It is the sound of his last great fight. Number 11 was his body sending a final warning. At the time of his death, Elvis Presley weighed close to 350 pounds. The man on stage in Rapid City was a far cry from the lean, electrifying youth of the 1950s. His physical appearance was a clear and devastating sign of his declining health. The most obvious change was his weight. The famous white jumpsuit, known as the sundial suit, was stretched taut across his frame. It was not the costume of a rock and roll god anymore. It was a garment struggling to contain a body in crisis. But the weight gain was not simply from overeating, though his diet was notoriously poor. It was a symptom of much deeper problems. He suffered from severe edema, which is fluid retention caused by, among other things, heart and liver problems. His face was puffy and swollen. His hands, as they moved across the piano keys, looked bloated. This was a side effect of his lifestyle and the massive amount of prescription drugs he was taking. His organs were failing. His body was retaining fluid because it could no longer process it properly. He also suffered from a range of other serious health issues. He had glaucoma, which caused pressure in his eyes and made the bright stage lights painful. You can see him squinting and closing his eyes frequently during the performance. He had extremely high blood pressure. He had an enlarged colon, a painful and chronic condition. He was, in medical terms, a very sick man. The physical effort of the show was immense. He was sweating profusely, not just from the heat of the stage lights, but from the sheer exertion his body had to make. Every movement seemed to take a toll. When he stood up from the piano at the end of the song, it was a slow, deliberate motion. He was not the explosive performer of his youth. He was a man carefully managing his energy, trying to get through the night. The contrast between his physical state and the power of his voice is what makes the performance so shocking. It's as if the voice was the last remnant of the old Elvis, a ghost of his former self, trapped in a failing body. His body was sending out every possible warning sign. The bloating, the labored breathing, the visible exhaustion. But the show went on, the machine kept running, and less than 2 months later, the warnings became a final, fatal reality. Number 10. Did the audience know they were watching a ghost? The audience in the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center that night was ecstatic. They screamed, they applauded. They flashed cameras, they were there to see the king. To them, he was still Elvis. From a distance, in the electric atmosphere of a concert, the details might have been lost. The crowd saw the jumpsuit, they saw the familiar jet black hair, and they heard the voice. The voice was still there. It was rich, powerful, and filled with emotion. For many in that audience, that was enough. They were not medical experts. They were fans. They were there to witness a legend. And they did. The love in that room was real. It had sustained Elvis for years. It was a powerful drug in its own right. When he sang and they responded with that wave of adoration, there was a connection that transcended his physical state. He was giving them what they came for. But if you watch the footage, you can see a disconnect. The booming, godlike voice is coming from a man who looks unwell, who looks tired and pained. The audience's cheers almost seem to be for a memory of Elvis, the Elvis of their youth, while the man actually in front of them was a shadow of that memory. Did they notice he couldn't hold his own microphone? Did they see the deep, weary lines on his face? Did they understand the physical effort behind every note? Perhaps some did. Those closer to the stage might have seen the sweat, the puffiness in his face, the look in his eyes. But the collective experience of a concert is a powerful thing. It can smooth over the rough edges. The sheer sound of the TCB band, the energy of the backing vocalist, the spectacle of it all, it created an illusion of the old magic. In some ways, the audience was part of the machinery that kept him going. Their unconditional love was what he craved. He needed to be Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. He couldn't be Vernon Presley's sick son. The audience, by cheering, allowed him to be that king for 2 more hours. They were not complicit in his demise, but their love created a space where the fantasy of Elvis could continue to exist, even as the reality of Elvis Presley was tragically falling apart. They were cheering for a man who was already leaving them. They just didn't know it yet. Number 9, how did his voice still sound so powerful? Elvis was taking a potent mix of opiates, sedatives, and amphetamines. Many of these drugs would impair the coordination and muscle control of an average person. Yet, his primary instrument, his voice, remained astonishingly intact. The power of Elvis's voice during this performance is the central paradox. His body was a wreck. His energy was low. His breathing was compromised. And yet, when he opened his mouth, that voice was still there. It was deep, resonant, and capable of incredible power and subtlety. How is this possible? Part of the answer lies in muscle memory and natural talent. Elvis was born with a truly exceptional vocal instrument. The physical structure of his larynx, the size of his resonant cavities, these were genetic gifts. He had spent over 20 years using that voice professionally. The technique was second nature to him. He knew instinctively how to produce that sound, how to control his vibrato, how to shape a note. Even when other parts of his body were failing, the muscle memory of his vocal cords and diaphragm was deeply ingrained. He didn't have to think about how to sing, he just did it. Another part of the answer is his willpower. Singing Unchained Melody with that level of passion took every ounce of concentration and will he had left. He was channeling all his remaining energy into that single act. It was a conscious decision to push past the pain and the physical limitations. He closed his eyes and went to a place where only the music existed. In that space, he could still be the Elvis of old. The voice became his escape, his final refuge from his failing body. There is also a raw, emotional quality to his voice in this performance that wasn't always there in his slicker studio recordings. The pain was real. The longing was real. The desperation was real. He wasn't just acting the part of a heartbroken singer, he was one. That authenticity poured into his voice, giving it a depth and a tragic beauty that is almost unbearable to hear. The voice was the last part of his greatness to go. It was the core of who he was. Long after the lean body and the snarling lip were gone, the voice remained. It was a final, defiant roar against the dying of the light. It was his soul, pure and uncut, broadcast for the world to hear one last time. Number 8, what were the TCB band members thinking? Behind Elvis, his longtime backing band, the TCB band, played with flawless professionalism. These were some of the best musicians in the world. James Burton on lead guitar, Jerry Sheff on bass, Ronnie Tutt on drums, and Glenn D. Harden on piano. They had seen Elvis at his best, and were now seeing him at his worst. Watching the footage, you can see the looks on their faces. They are focused on their instruments, hitting every cue perfectly. But there is a lack of joy. There is a sense of duty, of getting through the show. These men were not just employees, many were friends. They had traveled the world with Elvis. They had shared stages and private moments. They were witnessing the decline of their friend and their leader up close, night after night. Ronnie Tutt, the drummer, often had the clearest view of Elvis's back. He could see the sweat soaking through the jumpsuit, the physical strain. He set the tempo, the heartbeat of the show, and he had to adjust to Elvis's fluctuating energy levels. If Elvis was slow or seemed lost, the band had to be right there with him, supporting him, covering for him. Jerry Sheff, the bassist, has spoken about how difficult it was. He described moments where Elvis would be slurring his words or forgetting lyrics. The band had to be incredibly attentive, ready to jump in or stretch a musical section to give Elvis a moment to recover. They were a safety net. During Unchained Melody, when Elvis moves to the piano, the band's role shifts. They provide a soft, steady foundation for his vocal performance. They know this is his moment. They lay back, giving him the space he needs. There is a sense of respect, of giving the master the floor, but it must have been heartbreaking. They knew the man he had been. They remembered the energetic, commanding band leader of the early 1970s. Now they were watching that same man struggle to breathe and hold himself upright. They were professionals. The show had to go on. They played their parts perfectly, but they were also human beings watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion. Their flawless performance is in itself a devastating detail. It is the sound of a world-class machine functioning perfectly around a center that was breaking apart. Number 7 was the jumpsuit, a gilded cage. The white jumpsuit Elvis wore in Rapid City was custom-made, with an Aztec-inspired sundial design embroidered in gold and blue. These jumpsuits had become his trademark, a symbol of his larger-than-life stage persona, but by 1977 they symbolized something else entirely. In the early 1970s, the jumpsuits were a costume of power. They were flamboyant, athletic, and unique. They allowed him the freedom of movement for the karate-style moves he incorporated into his act. They made him look like a superhero, a rock and roll god descended to earth. But as his weight increased, the jumpsuits had to be redesigned. They became less a symbol of athletic freedom and more a means of containing his expanding body. The V-neck was cut deeper, perhaps to draw attention away from his bloated face. The high collar remained, a signature element, but it now seemed to constrict his neck. The effort required to get into one of these elaborate, heavy outfits must have been considerable for a man in his poor health. The jumpsuit was part of the trap. The audience expected it. The Colonel's marketing demanded it. He had to be Elvis, the icon in the white jumpsuit. He couldn't just walk out in a comfortable suit or a shirt. The costume was non-negotiable, so he was squeezed into this gilded cage every night. It was hot under the stage lights. It was heavy. It restricted his movement, which was already limited by his health. It was a constant physical reminder of the image he had to uphold, an image his body could no longer match. When he sat at the piano, the magnificent jumpsuit bunches and folds around him. The powerful symbol is reduced to just a piece of clothing on a sick man. It no longer looks like the armor of a king. It looks like a shroud. The contrast between the costume's intended effect, power, glamour, stardom, and the reality of the man wearing it is jarring. He was trapped inside the very image he had created. The jumpsuit, once a symbol of his spectacular comeback, had become the uniform of his slow, public decline. Number 6. How much was Colonel Parker to blame? Colonel Tom Parker had managed Elvis since 1955. By 1977, their relationship was less a partnership and more a deeply dysfunctional arrangement. The tour schedule that was running Elvis into the ground was largely the Colonel's creation. The Colonel's primary motivation was money. Elvis was not a person to him. He was a product, an attraction, and the attraction had to keep performing to generate revenue. In 1977 alone, Elvis was booked for over 100 concerts. This was a brutal schedule for a healthy man, let alone someone as sick as Elvis. The schedule was relentless. One city one night, another the next. There was no time for proper rest or recovery. Elvis would finish a show, get on his private plane, fly to the next city, sleep in a hotel room with blacked out windows, and then repeat the process all over again. This lifestyle exacerbated all of his health problems. It fueled his insomnia, which led to a greater reliance on sleeping pills. It encouraged a poor diet of readily available junk food, and it prevented him from ever getting the kind of sustained medical help he truly needed. The Colonel was aware of Elvis's deteriorating health. He saw the weight gain, he heard the slurred speech, but he chose to ignore it. As long as Elvis could stand up and sing, the show would go on. There were reports of people close to Elvis, like his friend Jerry Schilling, pleading with the Colonel to stop the tour and get Elvis help. The Colonel's response was always the same: the show must go on. He had a fear of stopping, a fear that if the money machine stopped, it would never start again. He also had his own significant gambling debts to pay off, which provided a powerful incentive to keep Elvis working. The performance in Rapid City was a direct result of this relentless pressure. Elvis was there because the Colonel had booked him to be there. He was on stage pushing his body to its absolute limit because he was the star of a show that could not be canceled. While Elvis made his own choices, he made them within a system designed by the Colonel, a system that prioritized profit over his well-being. The Colonel built the prison, and Elvis, for a complex set of reasons, never found the way out. Number 5. What was left out of the TV special? The performance of Unchained Melody was recorded for a CBS television special called Elvis in Concert. The special aired in October 1977, 2 months after Elvis's death. The final product was heavily edited to present Elvis in the best possible light. The producers of the special had a difficult task. They had hours of footage of a man who was visibly unwell. They had to create a final triumphant television event for a star who had just died tragically. The editing process was crucial. They selected the best performances, the moments where his voice was strongest and his energy seemed highest. They used quick cuts and different camera angles to minimize the sight of his bloated body and labored movements. And moments where he stumbled over words or seemed disoriented were left on the cutting room floor. For Unchained Melody, the focus is kept tight on Elvis's face. This was a smart choice as his face was still incredibly expressive and it conveyed the raw emotion of the song. But it also served to hide the full extent of his physical state. Wider shots that showed his full body or the concerned faces of his band members were used sparingly. The special also included interviews and older footage, creating a narrative of a triumphant final tour. The reality, of course, was much sadder. The broadcast version of Elvis in Concert is a sanitized version of the truth. It's a memorial, not a documentary. Like the raw footage, which has since circulated among fans, tells a more complete and devastating story. It shows the pauses, the struggles, the moments of visible pain that were edited out of the final broadcast. What was left out of the special was the unvarnished reality of his condition. The broadcast showed the world the power of his voice. It did not show them the full price his body was paying to produce that voice. It was an act of kindness, perhaps, to his memory and to his grieving fans. But it also perpetuated the myth, hiding the tragic human story behind the legendary performer. The unedited performance is harder to watch, but it is also more honest. Number 4, could anyone see the pain in his eyes? Beyond the physical bloating and the sweat, the most telling detail of the performance is in Elvis's eyes. When they are open, they reveal a profound weariness, a sadness that seems to go deeper than the lyrics of the song. For much of the performance, he keeps his eyes closed. This is partly a singer's technique, a way to focus inward on the emotion and the sound. But it also seems to be an act of retreat. He is shutting out the lights, the audience, the pressure. He is escaping into the music, the one place he can still find solace. But when he does open his eyes, they are not the fiery, rebellious eyes of his youth. They are not the smiling, charismatic eyes of his movie star days. They are the eyes of a man who is tired. Deeply existentially tired. There is a visible puffiness around them, a physical manifestation of his health problems. But there is also an emotional weight. They look heavy, as if the effort of keeping them open is immense. In moments, they seem to plead. When he sings the line, "I need your love," his eyes are open and directed forward, but he doesn't seem to be looking at the audience. He seems to be looking through them at something far away. It is a look of desperate, unanswered longing. There is no snarl, no wink, no hint of the old showmanship. There is only vulnerability. This is the face of a man stripped of his defenses. The stage lights are harsh, and they reveal the truth. He is not a king in that moment. He is a 42-year-old man, sick and lonely, who is pouring all of his remaining life force into a song. His eyes do not lie. They tell the story that his powerful voice tries to overcome. They show the cost of being Elvis Presley. It is a look of resignation, of pain, and of a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. Number 3, why did he pour so much into that final high note? The climax of the song arrives with the line, "I need your love." On this line, Elvis pushes his voice to its upper register, a powerful, sustained, almost screaming note of pure desperation. It is the emotional and physical peak of the performance. That final high note is not just a musical flourish. It is a primal cry. It is the sound of everything he was feeling, the pain, the loneliness, the frustration, the defiance, channeled into a single explosive moment. To produce that note required immense physical effort. He had to summon a huge amount of breath support from his compromised lungs. He had to tense the muscles in his neck and torso. You can see his body shake with the effort. It is a moment of total commitment. He holds nothing back. In that note, he transcends his physical limitations. For a few seconds, he is not a sick, overweight man. He is a voice, a pure, powerful instrument of emotion. The note is slightly raw, not perfectly polished like a studio recording. It has a rough edge, a strain that makes it all the more real and all the more heartbreaking. It's the sound of a man on the edge giving everything he has left. After the note, he almost collapses back into the song, his voice softer, his energy seemingly spent. It was a final great eruption of the volcano that was Elvis Presley. He had to know on some level that he was running out of time. This performance was for a television special, a document that would last. He was giving them one last piece of his soul. That high note was a final act of defiance against his failing body, against his critics, against the fate that was closing in on him. It was his way of saying, I am still here. You can see me falling apart, but you can still hear this. This part of me is still real. It is the most devastating and glorious moment of the entire performance. Number two, what happened in the 56 days after this performance. The Rapid City performance was on June 21st, 1977. Elvis Presley died at Graceland on August 16th, 1977. The 56 days between these two dates were a continuation of the same sad pattern. After the CBS cameras stopped rolling, the tour continued. He performed in Sioux Falls, then Indianapolis. His final concert ever was at the Market Square Arena in Indianapolis on June 26th, just 5 days after the Unchained Melody performance. The reviews from these final shows were mixed. Some reporters noted his poor health and lackluster performance. But the fans still came, still screamed, and still loved him. After the tour ended, he returned to Graceland. His life there was largely nocturnal and isolated. He spent his time in his upstairs bedroom suite, surrounded by a few trusted members of his entourage. He read books on spirituality, watched television, and continued to take the prescription drugs that were killing him. There were plans for another tour, scheduled to begin on August 17th in Portland, Maine. The day before he was due to fly out, on August 16th, he was found unconscious by his then-girlfriend Ginger Alden. His death was officially attributed to cardiac arrest. The 56 days were a countdown. The performance in Rapid City was not a turning point. It was simply a beautifully and tragically documented moment on a path he was already on. There was no dramatic intervention. There was no last-minute reprieve. The machine that was his life just kept moving forward, grinding him down until it finally stopped. He had plans for the future. He was engaged to be married. He talked about making different kinds of movies or changing his show. But he was trapped. He was unable to break the cycle of drugs, isolation, and the pressure of being Elvis. The man who sang Unchained Melody with such desperate longing did not find what he was looking for in those final 56 days. He just ran out of time. Number one is this performance more than just a song. This performance of Unchained Melody is no longer just a piece of music. It is an epitaph. It has become the definitive final image of Elvis Presley, more so than any photograph or official statement. It endures because it is a perfect 6-minute encapsulation of the entire tragedy of Elvis's life. It has everything. The spectacle of the jumpsuit, the loyalty of his friend holding the mic, the professionalism of the band, the adoration of the crowd, and at the center of it all, the profound and painful contradiction of the man himself. The failing body and the transcendent voice, the physical decay and the spiritual power. It is a performance of almost unbearable honesty. In an industry built on image and illusion, this was a moment of pure, unvarnished truth. He could no longer hide the pain. He could no longer fake the energy. All he could do was sit at the piano and sing, and in doing so, he gave us a glimpse into his soul. The performance forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality of our idols. They are human, they are fragile, and the love we give them can be both a blessing and a curse. The clip has become a cultural touchstone shared millions of times online. For many people born after his death, this performance is Elvis. Not the rebellious kid on the Ed Sullivan Show, not the handsome movie star, but this broken, beautiful man singing for his life. It is his final testament. It is not the legacy he might have chosen, but it is the one that has endured. A flawed, tragic, and utterly unforgettable masterpiece, a final, soaring note before the silence.